Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in to the official start of Season 3 of Daily Faceoff live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, live with myself, Tyler Yaremchuk, and our hockey insider, Frank Seravalli. Frank, it's officially October, and it feels good to be back talking hockey.
9 days away. This feels like the longest run up to the regular season ever. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because captain's practices started like quite literally a month ago, and we've sort of been in preview mode since. I can't wait to finally have something real to talk about.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. If you are new to the show and you haven't watched it in years past, here is the breakdown. We are live right here on the DFO YouTube every single weekday at noon Eastern time. It's a short show. It's only 30 minutes. We give you what you need with no filler. We start the show with 4 different topics. We spend 2 minutes and 30 seconds on each one. It's rapid fire style. We fly through them. We get to a big segment in the middle to really sink our teeth into a big story from the hockey world. And then we always take questions from you in the YouTube chat. And I see a bunch of you in there already, including some of our regulars from last year. It feels good to be back talking about our pal Bera in the YouTube chat. But it's a quick show, Frank, but we give the people what they want with none of the old filler.
Yeah, and hopefully it's fun too. Definitely we've had some fun and funny moments along the way. So yeah, looking forward to it. Let's go.
So let's start with topic 1, and it's some sad news from the hockey world this weekend, Frank, a story that kind of started developing last week. Calgary Flames assistant GM Chris Snow passed away over the weekend after a long and courageous battle with ALS. He was diagnosed with the disease back in 2019, and his fight was, inspiring. Almost doesn't feel like a big enough word, Frank. And you think about the impact he's had. The Calgary Flames Foundation ended up raising over $500,000 for ALS research as a result of the Snowy Strong campaign. He was an inspiration to so many, and it was really sad to see his fight come to an end.
Yeah, and I think even when you are dealing with something like ALS, which is such a terrible, awful disease, knowing that it's going to be fatal, the ending still catches you by surprise. And certainly in this one, Chris Snow was just at the Penticton Rookie Showcase 2 weeks ago with the Calgary Flames, traveled with the team. So this was sudden, and certainly just adds to the sadness of what was already a really sad story. His wife, Kelsey, has been documenting the entire thing. He's been very upfront and vocal about his fight against ALS. He's been a courageous spokesperson, but more than that, he's also been someone that's been a little bit transformative for the cause, entering some different studies and trying some new experimental medicine to try and prolong his life. And he did that. He was given 1 year to live back in 2019. It's almost the end of 2023. So no one battled harder than Chris, and no one earned more respect in the hockey world, not just through his battle, but the way he lived was the way that he was in the entire lead up to it. Kind, personable, hardworking. And so I think that's really what leaves a big hole in the entire Calgary Flames organization. And not just in Calgary, but also, of course, in his family as well. Your heart breaks and aches for his wife, Kelsey, and his kids, Cohen and Willa. It doesn't get any more terrible than that. And it's a really tough way to start the hockey season.
Yeah, it's the Calgary Flames, the entire hockey world heading into this season with heavy hearts. And also, his impact went well beyond just the hockey world. If we're talking about sports, I know he had a lot of ties to the baseball world from his time as a sports writer as well. I saw MLB insider Jeff Passan share a really nice note over the weekend as well. But you kind of touched on it, Frank, his impact in terms of his fight with ALS, the experimental things he went through. Like, this is going to allow other people with the disease to have their lives prolonged as well. You even think right down to the end where they were keeping him alive for organ donation as well. A really sad story, but at the same time, Chris Snow's journey inspired many. And like the rest of the hockey world, our thoughts are with his wife, Kelsey, and the rest of the Snow family. Let's turn the page, Frank, and as training camps roll on and players are getting set for opening night, which is under 10 days away in the NHL, there are a handful of talented young players who aren't on the ice with their clubs in training camp. Number one on that list is without a doubt Trevor Zegras, but he's also got a teammate in Jamie Drysdale joining him as one of the unsigned RFAs in the league. We're going to have Brent Wallace on from Coming In Hot. He covers the Senators like a blanket. He's going to talk to us a bit about Shane Pinto, but let's zero in on Zegras and Drysdale, Frank. Are there any updates here? Like for a rebuilding team like Anaheim, I'm sitting here going, how the hell are you going to potentially start the season without these two guys? One of them was your leading scorer. How are you going to start the year without these two guys in your lineup?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough spot for these players. And I don't want to say the Anaheim Ducks because they're basically GM Pat Verbeek is flexing and leveraging every muscle that he possibly can in order to try and keep these numbers down. And what that may result in, Tyler, I think is a savings for the next couple years on bridge deals because that's where this is trending. But there's mounting and growing frustration. And one thing I like about Trevor Zegras is he's not just incredibly dynamic and creative on the ice, but off the ice, he's not really afraid either. There's a guy with 2 consecutive 60-point seasons who's still only 21 and has a lot of room to continue to grow in the NHL. He's thinking that he needs to be paid at some point like a big-time player. He's on that track, and to this point, the Ducks are certainly not bringing that to the table. We're looking at probably a 2 or 3 year bridge deal, and the AAV, they're still pretty far apart. So this is, I don't want to say gotten ugly, but they're not anywhere close. And the frustration is mounting because, as you said, we're now less than 10 days away from the start of the regular season. Neither one of these guys is in camp, and it's put a strain on things. Can they find a way to get back together and find common ground? It kind of feels right now like they're a long ways off. And Jamie Drysdale, 2 years ago, we were talking about him as really kind of one of the bright up-and-coming young defensemen in the league. Last year only played 8 games, which is short of the 10 required to accrue another professional season and get him closer to arbitration. Was he healthy for those 2 games? I don't know. Not that it is going to end up mattering, but still, he's got something to prove, and we'll have to do it probably on a bridge deal. So no progress to speak of. And really, it's all eyes on the Ducks because there's not a lot of expectations this season. But, geez, it kind of hurts to not have 2 of your best young players.
I'm going to offer up a take on this. You tell me if I am way out to lunch on it. You said Trevor Zegras, 2 back-to-back 60-point seasons. He's only 21. He's also one of the most recognizable stars in the game. This dude has scored some highlight reel goals. He's led off ESPN. He's been on the cover of NHL 23. Is it fair to say that maybe this gap in negotiation is also in part because he's not a 90-point guy, but again, one of the most recognizable stars in the league. He wants to be maybe paid like a 90-point guy, even though he's not quite there. Like, has his star exceeded his skill?
I don't think that's fair. I think also look at the lack of support that he's had.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone is questioning right at this exact moment in time, is Trevor Zegras the best player on the Anaheim Ducks? The answer to me is no. That is Troy Terry. But Troy Terry signed for $7 million. And my understanding is that because everyone understands that Troy Terry is the Ducks' best player right now, even though he's older, the expectation from the Ducks is if you're signing a long-term deal, you need to get in line under $7 million. And Trevor Zegras is kind of already at that $7 million number, even on a short-term deal. So if you're going to extend him out further and want to go longer, you're going to need to pay a lot more than that. And the Ducks clearly aren't willing to do that. So where does the bridge deal AAV come in? It's a really good question. The Ducks are going to try and keep that pretty small.
Jeremiah is in the chat, and I think he sums up maybe where some frustration comes from Ducks fans. And it's Verbeek had no problem overpaying Killorn. He should pay Zegras. He's a budding star. And I mean, it's totally different because it's RFA, UFA stuff. But even if it's not fair, I think that's maybe where some frustration comes in from the Anaheim Ducks fan base in this situation. Let's begin our season previews, Frank. We're going to knock a couple of teams off the list today, but there's no better place to start than with the defending Stanley Cup champions in Vegas. They've had a spicy preseason as well with what went down between Mark Stone and the LA Kings. But let's dig into this from maybe a bigger picture perspective. Over the summer, there were no big upgrades made by the Vegas Golden Knights front office, but that doesn't mean there wasn't important business taken care of. They got Ivan Barbashev back after they picked him up at the deadline from St. Louis. Adin Hill has a fresh extension. He's going to be back in the crease for the Golden Knights. For me, the big question with this team kind of comes from you look at Mark Stone, probably their most important player, the injury thing. Who knows if you're getting anywhere close to 82 games out of Mark Stone this season? You go look at the rest of their forward core, and it's getting old, Frank. Like guys like Marchessault, Carlson, they're all well past 30 now. Do you think this aging core can keep up in the Pacific Division for another 82-game season?
I do. I think the backbone of their team, and certainly we saw last year, one of the big differences with the Vegas Golden Knights was their system. They did say goodbye to a few pretty significant pieces. I mean, Riley Smith is one. Yeah. Phil Kessel wasn't an impact player in the playoffs. He was a healthy scratch for 20 games, but he still had 14 goals and 36 points. You've had to say goodbye to a few of these pieces, just like you have to do on any Stanley Cup winning team. That's a fact of life. But I still think they have more than enough to be in that upper echelon of teams. And I would include them in a group of 7, 8, maybe 10 teams. I think 10 is like a little generous and stretching it, that have an authentic chance to win the Stanley Cup this season. They're in that group, especially if Adin Hill can play as well as he did last year. And especially if that defense core continues to be as big and as mobile as they've been. They've got a special something. And I'm curious, like some of the question marks I have are, is Mark Stone's back going to hold up all year? That's a big question. He got through the playoffs, but getting through 24 games is a lot different than getting through 82. So Jack Eichel, as well as he played, like they've got some of these pieces that really keep them in that top group. I think the other question for this team is, once you get past their top 6, which is on par with some of the best teams in the league, because of the cap and how they've structured things, they've got Eichel at 10 million, Stone at 9.5, that you inherently have to pay your bottom 6 a lot less. And most of those guys are $1.5 million or less. Are those guys, their bottom 6, going to allow this team to be what it needs to be in an 82-game slog? Because you need the contributions from those guys over a long-term period.
You look at their forward group right now, 13 players on the roster, 6 of them make under $2 million. It's also fascinating to see that of that forward group, only 3 of them are players that were picked in the expansion draft. Everyone else has been added after the fact for the Vegas Golden Knights. Quickly on the crease situation for Vegas, I've seen some people kind of say, can you really rely on Adin Hill to be a true number 1 this year? His numbers last season, both regular season and playoffs, were remarkable. I think they're fine between the pipes, because even if
Alters, this isn't a question, is it?
No, yeah, and I was just gonna say, I was leading in. I really like Logan Thompson as well. Like, even if Adin Hill were to falter, they are set with the backup position. I think Logan Thompson could very easily be their number 1 this year. Like 12 months ago, that's what we were talking about.
I would say, given how Adin Hill proved himself this past season, and I think the quality that you have in your backup in Logan Thompson, I'd venture to say that relative to dollars, the Vegas Golden Knights have a top 5 value crease. They're at basically $5.5 million between the two guys. How many teams are getting better value out of $5.5 million in goaltending?
Yeah, probably. I mean, you look at the team that's going to be competing with them. Edmonton spending $5 million on Jack Campbell alone. So yeah, when you look at the value in this crease, to have 2 guys who are capable of being a number 1, it's certainly there. I'm a fan of their blue line as well. It's easy to see why a lot of people are picking the Vegas Golden Knights to once again win the Pacific Division. Maybe, like you said, win another Stanley Cup. Let's talk about the team they beat in the Stanley Cup final, though, in the Florida Panthers. It's gonna be an interesting start to the season in Florida. No Aaron Ekblad, no Brandon Montour. Now, last year, I was someone who made the mistake of writing off the Boston Bruins because of all the injuries they had coming into the season. And what did they do? They persevered through it, had an amazing regular season. Can Florida do the same thing? Can they persevere through these tough injuries to start the year?
My answer is no. And the reason for that is, I'm just not a believer in Florida's defense core as currently constituted. I love The Oliver Ekman-Larsson edition at $2.25 million. Can he play to that level? Of course he can. I think you can answer that without blinking. I like Gustav Forsling, but let me read for you their top 7 or top 8 defensemen that are going to be in the lineup to start the season. Forsling, Nico Mikkola, OEL, Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, Josh Mahora, Lucas Carlson, and Matt Kierstead. You've basically got 3 bona fide NHL defensemen. Mike Riley was a buyout in Boston. And then you've got a couple guys. I like what Josh Mahora did last year as a waiver claim. I thought that was really smart. I'm not a Dmitry Kulikov believer. Lucas Carlson and Kierstead, like you've basically got 4 through 7 on that D core that are kind of fringe NHL players, is a fair way to say it. That's really going to be difficult because at the same time, I know you're expecting everyone's like, oh, can Sergei Bobrovsky bounce back and be the guy that he was in the playoffs? He basically played 2 months at .915 and the rest of the season at .901. So can you keep enough pucks out of your net? I have no question about their ability to score. I love their offense. I love their forward group. It's just until Ekblad and Montour are back, can they hang on? I know this came up last year with the Bruins. My answer is no. But in saying that, the Panthers on Christmas Day last year were like 7 points out of a playoff spot and had a very marginal record. Like we're on pace for like 82 points. So can they survive, play 500 until then? I think they probably can. But my problem with the rest of the conference is that I just think all those other teams are so much better constituted that I just don't – I don't know. I think the Panthers might be on the outside looking in at the playoffs.
109 points for Matt Tkachuk last year, 31 more than anyone else on that Panthers roster. I would argue they also need more secondary scoring this year. I don't think it's enough to once again sit there. Like, look what he led the team in the playoffs. Goals, assists, points. You can't just rely on Tkachuk again this year either. You're going to need more people. I know Carter Verhaeghe popped home 40 goals. That was an incredible year, but you're probably going to need a little bit more outside of Tkachuk in the forward group as well. I have a little bit more later in the show on the Florida Panthers and potentially their playoff chances this season. But first, let's get to our big segment for the day. Brent Wallace of Coming in Hot. Brent Wallace's appearance is brought to you by Betano. Everything you need to get in on the action a little bit, whether it's some NHL futures, which again, we'll talk about in a bit. Maybe you want to get in on the MLB postseason. Betano's got it all. The game starts now at betano.ca. 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Brent Wallace of Coming in Hot with Bobby Ryan and Jason York. They're fired up for a new season in Ottawa, and there's a lot for us to get through today, Wally, but I want to start at the top. Michael Andlauer puts his first kind of stamp on this Senators team and hires his pal Steve Staios to be the new president of hockey operations. Your thoughts on this decision, and do you think Staios is the right guy to kind of lead this Senators team out of the rebuild?
Hey, boys. Good afternoon. I do like it. I mean, Steve Staios is highly regarded across the NHL circles as a very smart hockey guy. I've known him for a bit back when he played. My co-host Jason York knows him really well, speaks very highly of him. It seems like it's a very good move. And not to forget, just above him is Cyril Leader, who's coming back into the organization as well. These are 2 huge moves by Michael Andlauer early on. This will really set the tone going forward for this organization. Now, they haven't had a director of hockey operations. They haven't had any oversight in this entire organization for like 6 years. This really helps solidify that and really gives Pierre Dorion another sounding board, some more maybe a safety net, if you will, or maybe Steve Staios is going to come in and surround himself with the people he knows best. So we'll wait to see how that plays out, but it's definitely great for this organization to finally get more people in the hockey ops department.
Yeah, I was actually just going to piggyback off of that, Wally, and ask you about really kind of the pressure that not just DJ Smith and this team are facing to get off to a hot start, but also considering that Michael Andlauer and now Steve Staios are going to be in evaluation mode to understand how everyone works. Is there heat on? Is the temperature turned up a little bit? Is the hot seat on for Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith to finally have this be the year where things turn around? every indication to this point is that Michael Andlauer is ready to be patient and is ready to move forward with these guys currently in their roles. But what are these guys looking at?
It's interesting, Frank, because normally patient is fine. Everybody's like, yeah, okay, come on in, check it out, get comfortable, figure out what you're going to hang on the wall. This team has started horribly for 4 straight years. And so by, what do we call it, the American Thanksgiving, they're already out of the playoffs for the most part. Last year, they missed by 6 points. Each of the last 4 years, they've been 28th or worst after 20 games into the season. They don't have that luxury. So that's an issue for them. If they don't get off to a better start, do we start to see changes a lot sooner than perhaps we normally would? That's where Shane Pinto comes into all this. And I know you spoke about him earlier in the show, and I'll lead into it if you don't mind, is they need Shane Pinto in this lineup. They need to have a very good start early on. Josh Norris hasn't played yet. He's coming off shoulder surgery. Shane Pinto continues to be an RFA, not signed. They need to go 1, 2, 3 down the middle with Tim Stützle as their number 1 center. If this team hopes to have success, they've got to have all those guys going in the lineup.
So I know a few teams have called the Sens about Shane Pinto, but the response has continually been, we're not trading this guy. We want to keep him. Why do you think there's been a disconnect to this point, now knowing that the regular season is 10 days away, from moving out other contracts or other pieces in order to prioritize Shane Pinto and getting this deal done? What's going on? What's the holdup?
So I can tell in your question, you don't really know what to say because none of us have been able to figure out exactly what the hell is going on. We knew this for months. We knew this contract was coming up, but yet, and if you read Ian Mendez's article in The Athletic today, he tells you, listen, they prioritize Zach McEwen and Travis Hamonic and Eric Brandstrom and signing all these players to contracts. Vladimir Tarasenko, they brought in Dominic Kubalik, all these guys, and yet Shane Pinto just sat there. Shane Pinto's a 20-goal scorer who filled in for Josh Norris, who went out with an injury. So he knows how to play second-line center minutes. He's extremely good defensively. He's smart. He's young. It's all that stuff. I don't know how they got to this point. Frank, I can't fathom how we've got here now 10 days away from the season when they should have made a deal to get him signed. They should have already traded the players away because now, in order to move those assets, you're going to have to sweeten the deal. And people are now saying, yeah, you know what? You want to give us Matthew Joseph or someone else? We also want a first-round pick. That's tough to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew Joseph has 3 years left at almost $3 million. That's not the easiest guy on your roster to move. But in it connected to all of that, so I don't want to over analyze or put too much emphasis on this, but you end up losing another player on your organization that you've helped develop the last few years in first-round pick Lassie Thompson. And I'm not sure what Thompson quite is yet. I think the answer is we don't know. And
that's the problem.
The Ducks have the space and availability to figure it out. So good on them for stepping in. But because you've prioritized some of these other guys, because you've brought back Travis Hamonic, because you signed Branstrom to a bigger deal, you don't have the room for Thompson. What's been the reaction to that in the Ottawa market, losing a first-round pick that you've spent all this time trying to develop?
Great question. It's interesting, Lassie Thompson, because nobody really knows what he is, and yet he's already being passed over. And now Tyler Kleven's here, and he is going to pass over Lassie Thompson. So he just kept getting pushed down the depth chart. Should they have lost him for nothing? No. Everybody knew he needed to clear waivers to go down to the minors. Chances are he wasn't going to slip through. Again, why wasn't there some kind of deal made? But maybe there just was no market for him. I have a tough time thinking that, but maybe there just wasn't a market. But there was no way I can fathom that Lassie Thompson would get through waivers and be playing the year in the minors for Belleville. But again, people question asset management in Ottawa, and that's that one, Lassie Thompson, and the Shane Pinto contract negotiations are two very glaring issues right now with the Ottawa Senators.
It's going to be fascinating right from the jump in Ottawa this year. If you're watching the show and you go, man, I want to stay up to date on the Ottawa Senators, the link to the Coming In Hot YouTube is in the description of today's episode. Thanks for doing this, Wally. Always a pleasure catching up with you.
Anytime, boys. See you soon.
It is time for the daily Faceoff inbox question. We are heading over to the YouTube chat, and we got a couple of interesting ones here. Our pal Bera is an Avs fan, Frank, and he wants to know if the Senators maybe tried to claim Spencer Martin and what they could be doing to try solve their backup goalie dilemma.
We won't know whether that was the case or not. I think you've got the Lightning trying to figure out their starting goalie dilemma. We know that the issue in Columbus was that Daniil Tarasov has been hurt. He hasn't been skating, and he was supposed to be the backup this year. So they had an opening. Spencer Martin was clearly the odd guy out once Casey DeSmith was acquired via trade. So that kind of filled that. And then the Canucks had two guys. I think we mentioned this on the DFO rundown last week that the Canucks had two guys, younger guys in mind that they want to be playing games in Abbotsford. So Spencer Martin was never going to be sticking around. I think there's a few teams that are trying to figure out what the waiver wire is going to look like. And I think the Avs are one of those. I think they've kept tabs on some other guys like Yaroslav Halak, who's been out there. He's been training in Boston, still ready to go. And more than the Avs, and their backup goalie situation, and not to say it's not a big deal because I think Francouz is pretty good. And Georgiev played 60 plus games last year, kind of out of necessity, but you're probably thinking he can do that again. They just kind of need someone to tide them over until Francouz can get back playing again, whenever that may be. But I'm way more curious about Tampa and what they try and do on the goalie front, because if you were to rank the top 64 goalies in the league, starter and backup, their guy Johansson would be 64th. So now for the first 10 weeks of the season, you're asking him, at least at the moment, to be the number one guy. And it's not possible. Cannot do it.
It's got to be an absolute lock that they claim someone or make a move here in the next.
I think that was their plan the whole summer. Like Mike McKenna was writing about this in like August, the dog days of the summer on dailyfaceoff.com, saying, what the heck are the Tampa Bay Lightning up to? Because Johansson is no good. And so he was thinking already that they were hoping to have Johansson as their third guy and that they were going to claim a second guy to be the backup to Vasilevsky anyway. So now it just sort of further highlights the issue for Tampa.
Mike was in and wants to know the certain date RFAs need to be signed by to be eligible this year. It is still December 1st, correct?
December 1st. Yep.
Perfect. And a couple of Oilers questions.
5 p.m. on December 1st.
All right. A couple of Oilers questions in the chat. I'll handle those on Oilers Nation every day, live in 90 minutes on the Oilers Nation YouTube. Let's move along to our daily bets for the day. Frank, brought to you by Botano, or courtesy of Botano. We talked about the Florida Panthers as our fourth topic, and Botano has odds on the Panthers to make or miss the playoffs this year. Yes is the runaway favorite, minus 122. Frank, I think you're going to agree with me. There's a ton of value on the Panthers at plus 165 here. I think this is a smart bet when you consider what that conference looks like.
I'm going to pass on this bet. I don't feel good about one way or the other, making the playoffs or missing. I could make the case that they're going to get in. I just made the case earlier that they could be on the outside looking in. I don't feel really good about it either way. So I would pass.
Fair enough. We also talked about the Vegas Golden Knights. They are tied for the best odds to win their division, along with the Edmonton Oilers at 2-1. Yourself and Jason Greger today on a new episode of the DFO Rundown previewed the entire Pacific Division from the Golden Knights all the way down to those San Jose Sharks at 250-1 to win their division. Frank, I'm throwing a unit on the Edmonton Oilers here. I think last year they finished just 2 points back of Vegas for that top spot, with a goalie in Jack Campbell who had like an .890 save percentage. I don't think Jack Campbell will be that bad again this year. You're smirking and probably thinking, wow, what a homer coming on here and picking the Oilers to win the division. But I really do think they have a good shot. I think the goaltending will be better. I think 2-1's a decent price.
So yeah, color me shocked that Tyler, the Oilers fan, is picking the Oilers to win the division. I also am picking Edmonton to win the division, but I would not place a bet on it because as much as I think the Oilers are in a good position to win, plus 200 doesn't really get me excited about the odds, considering what could go wrong. I mean, look at where the Oilers were last January. Also not really in that comfortable of a spot. I don't think Vegas is going to be highly motivated for the regular season, winning the Stanley Cup. Not to say there's a hangover, but I just think it's all about getting in and getting hot. That once you win, you're not as jazzed up or jacked up about this season. So for me, I don't know. I wouldn't touch it.
Fair enough. Let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. And Frank, you're on Twitter just as much as I am, and you've seen all the buzz about how good Connor Bedard's looked in the preseason. He's had a couple of beautiful chances. And I'll be honest, when I start watching these highlights and I see people posting like, whoa, look at what Connor Bedard just did, I'm expecting these to be going in. They're not. My question to you, and the reason I wanted to throw this in garbage time, are we maybe getting a little bit too excited here about Connor Bedard, or is this a guy who's going to be like a legit point-a-game rookie and these chances are just going to eventually start going in the regular season?
I think better than a point-a-game rookie. Whew. I think Connor Bedard is at 100 points this year.
No, Frank.
Yep. I've increased my projections. I think he's that good. And I find it hilarious. I don't know if you saw his quotes after the game. He was like, I hope I can make this team. And I was like, is he saying it with a straight face? Like, he had 2 points and 5 shots. Like, what is he even talking about? So yeah, all reports from Chicago indicate even better than they had expected, and they had high hopes. Did you see that one 100-foot pass on a dime to Taylor Hall in practice? Like, Taylor Hall's going to have 75 points this year if he stays healthy. Big things from Connor Bedard, total believer. And I'd say, I started off the summer saying 30-30-60 for Connor Bedard. That number's going up.
I think 100 is insane. That team's not going to be that good. 100 points on a line with Taylor Hall and Taylor Radish, Frank. I don't see that happening.
Okay. Sidney Crosby, 18-year-old season, 2005-06, on an absolutely dreadful Penguins team that only had 58 points. Crosby had 102, 39 goals, 63 assists.
Sidney Crosby barely got there.
Okay, but he got there is the point, and I'm saying Connor Bedard, I don't know if he's not going to be as complete, and I'm not saying he is Sidney Crosby, but I think he's going to be in very short order in the notch under McDavid with everyone else.
All right. It'll be fun to track. It's going to be Frank and myself every weekday on Daily Faceoff Live throughout the entire season. Tomorrow, our boy Steven Ellis is joining us. We'll see where he comes out on this whole Connor Bedard 100-point debate we're going to be having. A big shout out to Botano, a big shout out to our producer, Gavin Turnick, and Pat Puff, who was on graphics for today, as well as Brent Wallace for joining us for some Sens talk, and everybody who hopped in to the first YouTube chat of the season. Frank, this was a pleasure. We'll talk again tomorrow on Daily Faceoff Live.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.